The boardroom felt cold as ice. I stood there while VP Elliot Chambers spoke, his voice smooth like honey mixed with venom. He stood at the head of the long table, all of Crownwell and Pierce's executives surrounding him. My boss, my mentor, my betrayer. Marcus Hill, he announced, looking directly at me, has been temporarily reassigned due to mishandling of confidential company data. My stomach dropped. The words hit me like someone had thrown a brick through a window. Colleagues stared. Some gasped. I could feel their eyes on my face, searching for guilt. Elliot continued speaking, twisting my audit report into something dirty and unprofessional. He made it sound like I had done something wrong, like I was the criminal here. We simply cannot afford breaches of trust, he said, shaking his head slowly. The board members nodded along, believing every word. Applause started somewhere near the back, soft at first, then building. I watched Elliot smile, that perfect smile of his. The room felt like it was closing in on me. After the meeting, I walked to my office in silence. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move properly. My hands shook as I sat at my desk, staring at nothing. The words kept replaying in my head like a broken record. Mishandling confidential data. Breach of trust. Those weren't my words. Those weren't my actions. They were his. My phone started buzzing immediately. Messages came flooding in. "You okay, man?" from Derek in accounting. "I thought you were getting promoted," from Vincent down the hall. I couldn't answer any of them. I just sat there, frozen. My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing my heart. Then it hit me like lightning. Elliot hadn't just fired me. He had used my own report against me. The report where I found his mistake, where I discovered that millions of dollars had gone missing from his so-called innovation fund. He had taken my work, twisted it, and made himself the hero while making me look like the villain. I whispered the words to myself, barely audible. He threw me under the bus. As I cleaned out my desk, moving papers into a box with numb fingers, I started to understand what had really happened. My name is Marcus Hill. I was 36 years old and I had just been destroyed at work. But here was the thing that Elliot Chambers didn't know. He didn't know that my signature was on that audit report. Not just any signature, the official one. The one that made the whole thing real. The legal one that meant something in court, in investigations, in the eyes of regulators. He had buried that report in the company files, thinking he was safe, thinking that was the end of it. He thought he could cover himself by destroying me, by making me look bad, by making people think I was careless and unprofessional. But he had made one critical mistake. He never actually removed my name from the document. My signature was still there, frozen in time, proof of everything I had discovered. That signature would become his worst nightmare. I had no idea yet just how much power those ink marks would have. But I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over. 2 weeks before my public humiliation, I had been doing my job the right way. I was working late one evening, going through the company's investment accounts. Something felt off. The numbers in Elliot's innovation fund didn't match up. Millions were missing. I mean really missing, not small accounting errors. We're talking about the kind of money that could break a company. I spent 3 nights checking and rechecking the numbers. My eyes burned from staring at screens. My coffee went cold beside my keyboard. But I kept digging because the truth mattered to me. It always had. When I finally understood what had happened, I felt sick. Elliot had been moving money around, moving it from regular accounts into his personal fund, then funneling it into investments that made no sense. It looked like he was either incompetent or he was stealing. Neither option was good for Crownwell and Pierce. I documented everything carefully. I made notes about where the money came from, where it went, and when each transaction happened. Then I did what I thought was the right thing. I reported it to Elliot directly, trusting that he would want to fix his own mistake. But before I could even present my findings properly, my friend Tasha from Human Resources pulled me aside in the hallway. She looked worried, almost scared. "Marcus," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening, "you're poking the wrong bear here. You understand that, right?" I didn't want to believe her. I thought that facts were facts, that numbers didn't lie, that if you found a mistake, you reported it and people worked together to fix it. That was how the world was supposed to work. "It's just numbers," I told her. "Facts don't lie." But even as I said it, I could feel the unease settling into my stomach like a stone. Tasha shook her head. Elliot doesn't like being questioned, Marcus. Not by anyone, especially not by someone like you who could actually prove he made a mistake. I wanted to ask her what she meant by someone like you, but I didn't. I already knew. I was younger. I was black. I didn't have the connections that Elliot had. I didn't have his power. But I had something he didn't have. I had the truth on my side, or at least I thought I did. Then Elliot invited me to dinner. He called it a celebration of my hard work. We went to this fancy restaurant downtown, the kind of place where the waiters wear white gloves and the napkins fold into swans. Elliot was all smiles and compliments. Your diligence is exactly what this company needs, he said, leaning back in his chair. His tone was too smooth, too calculated. His praise felt like a trap. We ordered expensive steaks that I couldn't afford on my own salary. Wine came in glasses that cost more than my lunch usually does. Then, as the waiter walked away, Elliot slid a thick envelope across the table toward me. Let's keep this quiet, he said, his voice dropping. Between us. No need to make any noise about the audit findings. We can handle it privately. I stared at that envelope like it was a snake. I knew what it was, money, a bribe. He was trying to buy my silence. My hands felt cold even though the restaurant was warm. I can't do that, I said quietly. I pushed the envelope back toward him. The tension between us suddenly felt sharp as a blade. He smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. I think you should reconsider, he said. The next morning, everything changed. My private audit file was everywhere. Well, not everywhere, but in the hands of people who shouldn't have had it, except the file wasn't quite the same as what I had written. The numbers were twisted. The dates were changed. The conclusions looked like I had made them up. It was my data, but rewritten to make me look like the one who had falsified the reports. Not him, me. I felt the blood drain from my face as I scrolled through it. He had stolen my work and corrupted it. He had turned my evidence against me. I realized then that the setup had begun. This was all planned. The dinner wasn't a celebration. It was a test, a chance to see if I would take the money and shut up. When I refused, he decided to destroy me instead. I sat at my desk, hands shaking, knowing that I was in serious trouble. 2 days later, Elliot called an emergency meeting. He gathered the executive team and some board members. He presented what he called evidence of my negligence. He performed outrage perfectly, like he was an actor in a play. He stood there in his perfectly tailored suit, shaking his head at my supposed incompetence. Each slide on the screen showed my corrupted data. He made it seem like I had deliberately altered numbers, like I didn't know how to do my job, like I was dangerous to the company. When I tried to protest, to explain what had really happened, Elliot cut me off. Enough, he said coldly. You've embarrassed this company enough already, Marcus. We don't need to hear any more from you. The room went quiet. People looked at me like I was someone they didn't recognize, someone they didn't want to know. After that meeting, I was demoted. No gradual process, no warning period, just immediate demotion. They moved me to a compliance assistant position in the basement floor, a cubicle, a dead-end job that had nothing to do with my actual skills or experience. My computer access was revoked. My email was deactivated. I was a ghost employee now. I spent my first day in that basement cubicle staring at a blinking cursor on a computer that barely worked. The screen flickered. The keyboard stuck. Everything about it felt like punishment. Tasha visited me during lunch break. She brought me a sandwich and bad news. You need to walk away from this, she said, sitting on the edge of my desk. Transfer to another company. Get out while you still can. I looked at her and shook my head. Not yet, I said. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I knew it wasn't the right time to leave. That night, sitting alone in my apartment with the city lights glowing outside my window, I opened a backup drive I had kept hidden at home. I had always been careful about saving my work. I had always backed up important documents. It was a habit that had saved me before, and now it was going to save me again. The original audit report was right there, untouched and unchanged. I scrolled down to the signature line. My name was there in digital form. Marcus D. Hill, Lead Internal Auditor. The date, the time stamp, everything official and legal. A small, grim smile formed on my face. Elliot thought he had won. He thought that by destroying me publicly, he had erased the truth. But the truth doesn't disappear just because people stop looking for it. It stays there, waiting. And my signature on that document proved everything I had discovered. It proved that I had done my job right. It proved that Elliot had lied. Weeks passed slowly. I worked in that basement cubicle doing meaningless tasks, filing, data entry, nothing that used my actual skills. Elliot, meanwhile, walked around the office like a hero. He told everyone that he had fixed the company, that he had cleaned up a dangerous situation. People believed him. They congratulated him. They saw him as someone who was tough and smart, someone who didn't tolerate mistakes. I watched all of this from my basement cubicle, feeling the anger build inside me like pressure in a bottle, but I didn't explode. I stayed quiet, I stayed invisible, and I started documenting everything. Every email, every memo, every financial transfer, every conversation I could remember. I wrote down timestamps and dates. I created a timeline of events that showed exactly what had happened. I was building a map of the truth. Then Harold Jenkins walked into the office. Harold was the retired CFO. He had been at Crownwell and Pierce for over 30 years before he stepped down. He had always been kind to me. He had believed in me when I was still trying to figure out who I was as a professional. When he saw me sitting in that basement cubicle, his face fell. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat down heavily in the chair next to my desk. Finally, he looked at me and asked a simple question. "If you were me," he said, "how long would you wait before the truth spoke for itself?" I thought about that question for a long moment. Then I answered. "Until no one can talk over it," I said. Rumors started spreading through Crownwell and Pierce like water seeping through cracks in concrete. External investors were asking questions. They wanted to know why Elliot's innovation fund kept losing money even after he said it had been fixed. Elliot dismissed their concerns, but I could see the cracks forming in his perfect facade. His temper started showing. He would snap at people in meetings. He would send angry emails. The pressure was building on him, and he didn't know why. He didn't know that people were comparing his old statements with his new ones. They were realizing that the timeline didn't make sense. They were starting to understand that something wasn't right. Then the founder retired unexpectedly. Suddenly, Elliot was appointed acting CEO. His arrogance reached new heights. He gave a speech about integrity and transparency. I watched from the crowd, clapping slowly as he talked about the importance of honesty in business. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Here was a man who had falsified documents, stolen millions, and destroyed an innocent person's career, standing in front of everyone and preaching about ethics. It was almost funny. Almost. I began helping the external compliance firm that was hired for a quarterly review. I didn't tell them my whole story. I just passed along small clues, little hints about where they should look. I made sure they knew about certain files and certain transactions. I didn't directly accuse anyone. I just helped them find their own way to the truth. I was like a guide in the dark, pointing out the path without saying where it led. One day, Elliot called me into his office. He was sitting behind a huge desk now in the corner office that used to belong to the founder. He looked confident, smug. "I know what you're doing," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Don't try to rewrite history, Marcus." I sat there calmly and replied in a voice that didn't shake. "I don't need to," I said. "It's already written." The compliance team demanded to see the original documentation from the Innovation Fund. They wanted to verify everything. Elliot panicked. He insisted that the original files had been lost, that they were corrupted, that they couldn't be recovered. Then the auditors revealed something that made his face go white. "We already have a copy," they said. "It's signed by Marcus D. Hill." The room went silent. Elliot's jaw clenched. He looked like he might be sick. Internal chaos erupted after that. Emails flew back and forth between departments. People were confused. Questions were being asked. Elliot stormed into his old department, yelling at staff, desperate to find any way to explain the signatures and the missing funds. He was panicking now. The pressure was too much. His perfect world was collapsing around him. The external audit results were finally presented to the board. Everyone gathered in the big boardroom. Elliot sat there trying to look calm, but sweat was visible on his forehead. The auditors presented their findings. The signature on the official document, Marcus D., the smoking gun that proved everything. It proved that Elliot had knowingly falsified data. It proved that he had stolen the money. It proved that he was guilty. The room went completely silent. Then someone asked for me to clarify the details. I stood up and said quietly, "Every number tells a story. You just refuse to read it." Elliot was suspended immediately pending a full investigation. The press got hold of the story and it spread like wildfire. News outlets reported on the corruption at Crownwell and Pierce. The company's stock price dropped dramatically. People were shocked and angry. Investors demanded answers. I left that boardroom meeting in a strange state of disbelief. After all this time, after all this waiting, justice was finally shifting my way. Elliot tried to contact me privately, begging for help. He wanted me to help him fix the narrative. We met one last time in an empty parking lot near the office. He looked broken, destroyed. "They're destroying me," he said, his voice cracking. I looked at him and replied without anger, just with truth. "You did that yourself," I said. "I just signed it." The board officially cleared my name. Harold Jenkins returned as interim CEO and personally reinstated me as head of internal compliance. When I walked back into the top-floor office, the same one where I had been humiliated, people applauded. Real applause, genuine applause. I stood there, feeling something shift inside me, something heavy lift away. Elliot's assets were frozen pending investigation. His public statement tried to frame everything as a misunderstanding, but investors sued him personally anyway. The legal battle stretched ahead of him like an endless road. Meanwhile, I received an internal commendation and a private thank you letter from the founder. "You saved this company's integrity," it said. I read those words over and over. They mattered more than any promotion ever could. Months later, Elliot reached out asking for a job reference. He was desperate, blacklisted everywhere. No one wanted to hire him. I hesitated for only a moment. Then I wrote one line and sent it. "Mr. Chambers demonstrated firsthand how integrity cannot be negotiated." I sent it without bitterness, just as fact, just as truth. I stood at my office window looking out at the city skyline glowing in the evening light. The view was beautiful from up here. The same view that Elliot used to enjoy. I thought about everything that had happened. The humiliation, the silence, the waiting, the small smile I had smiled when I realized my signature was still on that document. I whispered to myself the lesson I had learned. I thought my silence made me powerless. Turns out it was the loudest weapon I had. Then I turned back to my work, back to the real job of keeping a company honest, back to building something that couldn't be destroyed by one man's ambition.